morning. It's Thursday, August 20th, 2014. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. We're in a special broadcast this morning. It is day 45 of Operation Protective Edge. Hamas has warned international airlines to steer clear of Israel's Ben Gurion airport from 6 a.m. this morning. Thus far, rocket sirens have sounded in the Eshkol region and in Ofakim overnight, both in Israel's south. Since the truce was breached on Tuesday of this week, over 200 rockets have been fired from the Gaza Strip and into Israel. On the diplomatic level, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is in contact with Qatar and Turkey to renew the truce between Israel and Hamas. And the UN Security Council has issued a statement urging the two sides to return to the negotiating table and support the Egyptian initiative. Yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a press conference in which he directed heavy criticism at cabinet members who have publicly spoken against the handling of Operation Protective Edge, telling them to leave aside their, quote, empty slogans and unrealistic positions. Netanyahu would not comment on if Israel targeted and killed Hamas military leader Mohammed Def, and only would say that terror chiefs were a legitimate and prime target for Israel. Meanwhile, reports are emerging of an alleged death certificate for Def, but it's still being debated whether the document is forged. With me this morning is Tal Shalev, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent. Tal, thank you for joining us. Major General Oren Shachol, President of the International Chamber of Commerce Israel and former coordinator of the government's activities in the territories, thank you for joining us, Oren. And Amir Oren Haaretz, Senior Defense Correspondent. Amir, thank you for joining us. Tal, I do want to start with you. A very heated press conference yesterday in which Netanyahu first and foremost directs the most criticism, one will say, towards his own cabinet members.
Well, yes. First of all, we were all, everyone who arrived at the press conference and all the international media and Israeli media was anticipating an answer to the question of the day. What happened to Mohammed Def? That, of course, was left unanswered. But but we did get an answer to what is really occupying Netanyahu these days, and this is, of course, the political problems. Netanyahu dedicated, I think it's more than, probably if we're into percentage, 75-80% of the press conference, both him and the defense minister Yalon, to attacking the cabinet ministers, and it seems like he's fed up with their behavior. Will it work for the long run? Will it work for his benefit? It's not clear. There is a way. When you attack your contenders so harshly, it means that they get a equal standing to yours, and that is one of the questions. And when you read the social media comments and much of the Israeli media commentators, how they viewed this, they reacted to this press conference. It did not do Netanyahu much well to show that this is what is occupying him, and I'm not sure it did well for him to. This is what he had to say to the Israeli public on a day that fighting has resumed, on one of the harshest days of rocket fires since the operation began.
Indeed. Let's take a quick look at what Netanyahu said yesterday to his cabinet members during the press conference.
Expect everyone to be responsible, not to spew out words and empty slogans which do not stand the test of the large considerations we have to make. Military considerations, diplomatic considerations, economic considerations. These are our guiding principles. This is how we operate, and I expect the others to act responsibly.
Amir, would you say that perhaps because Netanyahu has a lack of a plan, as we've spoken about a few military-wise and perhaps also diplomatically now, this is why he has to direct most of his time towards his own cabinet?
It's a convergence of two streams. One is the military operational one, where Israel seems at a dead end, because Hamas has the ability to say no. Whatever is thrown at Hamas, both diplomatically and military, they keep saying no, and therefore Israel has no exit strategy because it doesn't want to go unilaterally. This stream converges with the political one. And even before the lowest point in this campaign, Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman was heard behind closed doors promising to bring down the House, to leave the government, to bring down the coalition, and act in order to have early elections next spring.
Something that he has said from the beginning, but yet...
yes, but if Netanyahu is reading the map and he knows that this is a foregone conclusion, he is now acting as if Lieberman and others are his rivals rather than partners in the coalition. So he is preparing the ground for the next political campaign, even as he is conducting this military one.
But Tal rightfully notes that perhaps he should have used this platform to speak to the residents of the South, which yesterday I think only had to ensue 168 rockets, the heaviest since the operation began.
Yes, but you know that what we now have all over the world is national television and perhaps international television. You can't speak to just one focus group. And what can Netanyahu tell the residents of the South? If he is talking about empty slogans, he is probably the master of them. And he can't promise them anything that will be fulfilled. And calling for patience and forbearance does not work with the Israeli public. Israelis are impatient. Mm-hmm. They have a short fuse. They want answers now, especially after 6 weeks of fighting. And saying that if not tomorrow, then the day after tomorrow, this is not good enough.
Is there a military plan, Orange Shor, that can perhaps save Netanyahu from this catch-22 almost? He can't promise the southern residents quiet, yet at the same time he's dealing with a whole political mess.
I think that Netanyahu finished his targets already. I think that we are close to a new beginning, new year, learning, students, etc., etc. I think that what we are talking about in near Gaza Street, people are fed up with this conflict, and Netanyahu got the feeling that he must do something, and talking with the Hamas is not his master plan. Mm-hmm. So,
although that's what has been...
but that's a fact. Mm-hmm. So after the death of this dear gentleman, Mohammed Def, he must think about something. And I agree with Amir Oren, talking about his political life and the new era. Mm-hmm. It's talking especially about Lieberman, less Bennett, but especially Lieberman. It's a fact. And Netanyahu, I saw him yesterday. He was very close to his nature, not well behaved and. But he spoke freely mm-hmm. about many things, and his target in these issues was especially Avigdor Lieberman.
And speaking, you bring up, of course, Mohammed Def, and the question that was circulating around not only here in Israel, but around the world, is he dead?
He's dead. He's dead, for sure. I saw the facts. I saw yesterday the papers. He's dead for sure. I know this gentleman from the day of Mohammed Dahlan. He was a close friend to Mohammed Dahlan. They learned together in Gaza, and he's dead.
The documents that you saw...
Believe me, I'm sure about it. It's not talking about realpolitik, and mm-hmm. He's dead.
And
sure.
I will believe you, of course, but I do want to go into... Israel has a history of targeted assassinations, and usually what happens is Hamas does admit that it has been targeted. This time Hamas is still saying he's alive.
Yes, that's the custom, and I really understand it, but believe me, he's dead. And even the Hamas, they know that it's a new era, and it's a new... and beginning, and talking about Egypt and Cairo, pay attention to what happened there. They will begin soon again to talk, and it will be a new stage.
Amir, do you agree? Yesterday we spoke about Mohammed Def as a target also for Netanyahu politically to come back and show the Israeli public, look, this is what we've achieved.
Yes, but this is only the means to an end, and the end is to bring about the cessation of hostilities and some new horizon, both to residents of the South and all Israelis, and to the Palestinian population. And because Def has been underground and was not seen anyway, whether he is alive or dead may impact on the negotiations mm-hmm. in the dealings, the dynamics among the members of the leadership of Hamas.
But in previous targeted assassinations, it was very clear if the target was hit, when we're thinking about Sheikh Yassin and Rantisi and so forth. Now it's still very unclear.
Yes, it reminds one of the old Hollywood joke about an actor who died, and some of his competitors were saying, Yes, that's a very interesting career move, but what is he aiming at? If Deaf is dead, why doesn't he come out and say it? Why doesn't he call Orange Shachor and protest the death certificate that Orange just issued him? It is a positive action on Israel's part, especially because if Deaf is no longer with us, the Israeli Defense Forces would not have to send an armored column to Gaza to pluck him from beneath the Shifa hospital. And that would have entailed many casualties all around. But in the long run, we are all dead. And in the long run, Israel would have to find a solution.
I'm going to get a quick update now from our I-24 News correspondent, Daniel Roth. Daniel, you're at Ben Gurion Airport this morning, where, according to Hamas, since 6 a.m. they were going to start firing. What's happening there so far? There hasn't been any fire, of course, this morning towards Ben Gurion.
Yeah, there hasn't been any fire at all towards Ben Gurion Airport. And if you can see behind me, everything's running on time. The airport's full, lineups are forming, and actually the only two flights that have been canceled, departures from Ben Gurion Airport, are to Amman and Cairo, two flights that were canceled this morning. We're still trying to find out if that has anything at all to do with the situation, though the spokesperson for Ben Gurion Airport has said that they're not aware of any single reason for those cancellations, and that they're probably just for other reasons.
And you said that business is as usual now in the airport. People are not weary of coming and flying and using the platform, of course, after Hamas has warned also international airlines don't land at Ben Gurion Airport.
Yeah, so Hamas has warned not to land, and we've heard of certainly people being wary. You can see some people are a little nervous here, but really not so much. Most people are just getting ready for their flights as normal, as usual. If you look around, people are as weary as travelers often are at airports.
Daniel Roth, thank you for that update. We, of course, will be receiving updates from you throughout this special broadcast. Amir?
You know, Yael, we've been looking at this problem with the Ben Gurion Airport as if it is a normal chain of events, rockets flying all around, Qassam or Grad or whatever, and then the Iron Dome rockets flying at them. And airline pilots behaving as if it is business as usual. It is very unusual, and credit is due to the Civil Aviation Authority headed by Major General Giora Rom, who managed to ease the fears and tell the airline directors and the aviation security experts world over that it is safe to fly into Israeli airspace, not only Ben Gurion Airport itself, but Israeli airspace. Just imagine what would have happened if an Israeli pilot was ordered to fly into some war zone in Central Asia under similar circumstances. Right. It is abnormal, and it is very interesting that globally most experts believe Israeli assurances that nothing will happen to the planes and to the crews and to the passengers.
Although the FAA had issued a warning last time around and canceled flights, why haven't they done it this time? Because they believe the Israeli authorities?
The last time a rocket landed approximately a mile from the outer fence of Ben Gurion Airport.
Yes, but this time Hamas is vowing you will do the same.
Yes, but a threat is not the same as fulfilling it. And also after the last time, the Israeli Air Force has changed its protocols, and now it will intercept each and every rocket flying around Ben Gurion, even though some shrapnel might still fall on the tarmac.
We have to blame the Kippat Barzel.
The Iron Dome.
Yes, that's really the fact, and we are acting as Kippat Barzel is the result of the more than 90% of Kippat Barzel. That's a fact.
And that is what is saving us. Saving us for now until the next operation. Tal, I want to talk to you about the diplomatic level now going on. Part of the press conference yesterday, maybe a smaller part compared to the political part, was directed to gaining again international support, something that Netanyahu has maybe mentioned or tried to garner throughout the operation. Now we're hearing reports that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is going back to Turkey and Qatar, two countries that Netanyahu said from the beginning, they're not our friends.
Well, yeah, I think, I don't know if it's a pressure mode to make Netanyahu go back to the Egyptian initiative, but Netanyahu is keen on returning to the Egyptian initiative and to go back to negotiations in Cairo. That is the direction that the officials around him are directing. It's just not clear that his coalition partners are very happy with that. That was one of the reasons that this whole big dispute broke, because Netanyahu said we might have to go back to negotiating with Hamas, and Naftali Bennett started to say that he opposes negotiation with Hamas. That's how, inside the cabinet meeting before the press conference, that's how the whole big dispute began. But Netanyahu is hoping to get back to the Egyptian initiative, probably because he doesn't want Kerry to bring in Qatar and Turkey, and he hopes that the Egyptians will be able to do so. But I do not rule out the option that it's clear that the Egyptians are not able to bring Hamas to the table, and the U.S. is coming to try and bring again Hamas to the table. But yesterday there was a report in Al-Hayat that Mashal left the talks after Qatar actually made him to leave the talks, because they didn't want Egypt gaining such a regional standing. And so there's a lot of...
Why would Kerry then, in that case, go to Qatar and Turkey? The Kerry, of course, does understand that Qatar and Turkey are not an honest broker, not for Israelis, but sometimes also not for the Americans themselves. They also have their own disputes.
Qatar is also yesterday was blamed by a German minister on their involvement in funding ISIS. Qatar is definitely a problematic factor in the region, but it is the one that can bring Hamas to the table. So that is why Kerry and the United States have been in ongoing contact with them, and Qatar and the U.S. do have have their own close relationship. Why does Kerry continue to be so involved and engaged in a conflict that it's clear that nobody really wants him around? Because that's the way Secretary Kerry works.
Well, the U.S., as the presumed leader of what was called the free world, cannot sit idly by when there is a prolonged conflict, especially one when it still has some influence. It can hardly do anything in Iraq except airstrikes, and it can hardly settle the Ukrainian-Russian problem. But here it can and probably must act. And Erdogan in Turkey is now well positioned, right, to say to have some moderate positions. Before his election, he had an extreme position. Now he can contribute something.
Now he's in a more symbolic role, of course, as well.
No, it's not really symbolic, because he will control the next prime minister, probably Davutoglu, and he will have the major influence on Turkish foreign policy. But in addition to that, the Egyptian initiative, the Egyptian proposal, is the only one on the table, and all sides must make reference to it. And eventually, something along the lines of the Egyptian proposal is going to be accepted. However, this is the micro problem. The macro problem is that there are various narratives here. And from the Palestinian perspective, the very fact that for almost 2 months, and we don't know how long it will go on, but for now, for 2 months, they have withstood an Israeli onslaught. From their perspective and for their narrative, this is an achievement enough. So this has to be balanced against the fine print in the proposal itself.
It's a new opportunity to Abu Mazen also, especially now. And I think that's a part
the fact
of
that the Americans are back in...
And Kerry, he got the feeling that he can do something.
Netanyahu also had some slight change of tone yesterday, which it's not clear exactly what he did mean, but he says that he's looking forward to restarting peace negotiations with a Palestinian government committed to peace, ending terror in a previous agreement. Up until before the operation began, this was not enough for Netanyahu, that the Palestinian unity government would be committed to these principles.
Which then begs the question, why did Israel have to go through Operation Protective Edge to get to these conclusions?
That's a very good question.
But when he spoke about committed to prior obligations, this was a signal for Mahmoud Abbas to have Hamas, rather than protest the quartet conditions, one of which is prior commitments. If Hamas would sign on regarding prior obligations, then Netanyahu can work with the unity government.
That's the fact.
That is
a new signal. It's a new signal talking about Netanyahu.
But I did ask the question, and I know it's a rhetorical one. Did Israel have to go through Operation Protective Edge to get to this new signal?
I think yes, because we are the behavior is almost the same, but it's as I mentioned in the beginning, it's a new stage, a new signal, new music. And we shall act. Suddenly we discover Abu Mazen again, and let's see what happened.
There is another point: the so-called split between the West Bank and Gaza. Netanyahu's policy all along has been to work for two Palestines, rather than work against a unified one, which could fall under Hamas's spell. He wanted to have the PA on the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza, and have a friendly neighbor on the east and a hostile neighbor in the west. This pushed Abu Mazen into the arms of Hamas. And before the operation, Netanyahu saw the national unity government, the Palestinian unity government, as a danger. Now he is forced to see it as a lever he can use in order to have some progress in the peace process.
But still, yeah.
But just the fact is that if Netanyahu, given the shaky coalition situation we were talking about earlier, if Netanyahu does resume peace negotiations with the Palestinians at the end of the day, it will entail probably some kind of political change, and it's not clear we'll even get there before there is some political shift inside the Israeli government.
That's true, because Netanyahu would have to pay something in advance to Mahmoud Abbas. We left the peace process late April with Netanyahu still in debt to Abu Mazen regarding the fourth batch of prisoners. If he's going to restart negotiations, he will have to either freeze settlement activity or release prisoners. So there you're having these problems that you talked about inside the coalition. But if he's going to early elections, it will all be frozen.
There's also other issues on the table. There's also an economy on the table. There's the minute the operation will be over, Netanyahu will start a new political challenge that will be in a whole new surrounding and atmosphere.
And
in
it won't
any
only
case.
be security-based. Let's take a quick update from Jonathan Regev, our I-24 news correspondent. You're there now on the Israeli-Gaza border a day after 168 rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip into Israel. What's the morning like?
Well, a rather quiet and I'd say surprising, in a surprising manner here at the Israeli-Gaza border after the very violent day we have seen yesterday. As you mentioned, over the night we've heard of one interception over the city of Ofakim. That was about at around 2 a.m. This morning, 3 sirens sounded at one of the regional councils that surround the Gaza Strip. 2 of those, the early ones, were false alarms. The third one, just around 8 a.m., we're hearing of one rocket that fell in an open area in one of those regional councils. No damage, no casualties, we're happy to say. Does that mean anything for the residents of the area? I think the answer is definitely no. Everybody here knows that we should expect more fire coming in from Gaza, that is right behind us, from the Gaza Strip towards Israeli territory. The outfit we're wearing, I think, speaks for itself. We are waiting for a day of more rockets being fired from Gaza. But as we have said, the night, especially when we talk about the expectations. Yesterday, the night was relatively quiet.
Jonathan Regev there at the Israeli-Gaza border. Thank you for that update. Tal, also diplomatically, the UN Security Council is now urging both sides. And we've also heard comments and reports here urging Netanyahu to proactively go to the Security Council to ask for a resolution. Maybe that's a diplomatic route that can be taken to get international support.
That's a diplomatic idea that has been floated in the past few weeks from some of the media commentators and inside the cabinet, but it doesn't seem that Netanyahu is enthusiastic to go that way. A UN Security Council resolution is very risky. Israel does not have all the influence on the wording of such a resolution, and it could set parameters that Netanyahu will not be happy to have. If Israel would have, it's true, if Israel initiates it through her allies in its allies in the Security Council, this could be a way out. But it doesn't seem that Netanyahu is moving that way, and that is the direction that things are moving.
Also, there is a danger, diplomatic danger, in a de facto recognition of Gaza under Hamas as an entity. In Lebanon, 8 years ago, Resolution 1701 was between Israel and Lebanon.
Right.
And Hezbollah, of course, had a major say in Beirut. But nevertheless, ostensibly, it was Lebanon. Here, if the UN is calling on both sides and Hamas is a side, it means that it gets co-equal status.
It gives them another status. Another part of Netanyahu's press conference yesterday was, of course, showing the world, yes, you saw the beheading, the gory and terrible beheading of an American journalist. Hamas is just the same. Let's take a quick look at what he said yesterday, and then we'll chat about that.
Hamas is like ISIS. ISIS is like Hamas. They're branches of the same tree. And I can say that the entire world has been shocked by the atrocities of ISIS. You saw this, the beheading of an American journalist, Foley. It shows you the barbarism, the savagery of these people. Well, we face the same savagery. The people who wantonly rocket our cities and want to conduct mass killings. And when they can, they murder children, teenagers, shoot them in the head, throw people from the 6th floor, their own people, and use their people as human shields. Hamas is ISIS, ISIS is Hamas. They're the enemies of peace. They're the enemies of Israel. They're the enemies of all civilized countries. And I believe they're the enemies of the Palestinians themselves. And I'm not the only one who believes that. Toda rabah.
Tal?
Just Netanyahu did probably, many times he thinks American, so he identified the harsh reaction in the United States to the ISIS beheading of the journalist, and he went very quickly to give a new soundbite. Right. Hamas is ISIS, ISIS is Hamas.
But because this is a very complex region, in Syria, for instance, an Al-Qaeda offshoot called Jabhat al-Nusra is now fighting ISIS. So that means that Netanyahu is legitimizing an American cooperation with an Al-Qaeda offshoot against ISIS. If one wants to take this logic to its
Thank you to my panelists. We do have to go straight to headlines, and we'll be right back. Good morning. It is Thursday, August 21st, 2014. We're in our special broadcast this morning on our I-24 News Morning Edition. It is day 45 of Operation Protective Edge. Hamas has warned international airlines to steer clear of Israel's Ben Gurion airport from 6 a.m. this morning. Thus far, rocket sirens did sound in the Shkol region and in Ofakim, both in Israel's south, but none, of course, in Israel's center near Ben Gurion airport. We're going to go straight to a report covering Mohammed Def's wife's and daughter's funeral yesterday, and we'll take it from there.
49-year-old Mohammed Def al-Masri, also known as Abu Khalid, was born in Khan Yunis in the south of the Gaza Strip. Israel targeted Def's life at least 3 times, and in 2002 he came close to death, barely surviving an injury that left him partially paralyzed with speech and movement impairments. The assassination attempt marked the last time Def was seen in public. He showed signs of life later in the form of recorded messages with his face hidden. Deff was one of the founders of suicide bombers terrorism, the method that transformed Hamas from small groups of knifers and gunmen to one of the two biggest and deadliest terror organizations in the region, alongside Hezbollah. During the first Intifada in the 80s, Deff spent time in Israeli prison. In the 90s, he moved up in the ranks of the organization, planning Nachshon Wachsman's kidnapping as well as other major terror attacks. In 1996, after Yehia Ayash, the engineer, was assassinated by Israel, Deff took his place as commander. One of his last messages to Israel was recorded and transmitted shortly after the disengagement from Gaza.
You used to tell each other, go to Gaza, meaning go to hell. And today you leave Gaza because it is hell. Tomorrow we will make the entire Palestine hell for you.
To this day, Deff is considered a legend and a respectable figure among many who value his struggle. According to Hamas internal sources, there is no greater expert than Deff in terror attack planning. A few hours after the IDF completed its ground offensive in Gaza, Chief of Staff Gantz made a clear threat.
We're not done. The military is prepared for anything. Should future events arise, we will know how to respond.
The coming days will tell if the events in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood were a game changer in the current conflict between Israel and Hamas, or merely another night strike that will strengthen the legend of Mohammed Deff.
With me in studio is Ali Waked, I-24 News senior Middle East analyst. Good morning, Ali. And Boaz Bismuth, Israel Hayom's foreign affairs editor. Good morning, Boaz. Yesterday, Ali, Hamas did call out to the residents of Gaza, come to this funeral, show your support, and they did come in the thousands.
Yes, and officially it was the funeral of Deff's wife and daughter, and we still don't have any answer about who is the missing body that was in the place of the Israeli airstrike.
Although reports of a death certificate have emerged on Israeli media.
Yeah, that's right. But, and in the evening, the spokesperson of the Hamas military wing denied the fact that Mohammed Deff was killed, and he said that Deff will lead this campaign and other campaign of Hamas until the liberation of Jerusalem. The other point that we should take into consideration, it was the record number of rockets that was shot towards Israel yesterday. 168, which proved that maybe something really annoyed Hamas, embarrassed Hamas. In any case, this is a very serious penetration to the Hamas top military infrastructure. Hamas is leading a huge investigation to try to know how this information reached to the Israelis, whether by Hamas prisoners who were arrested in this campaign, or during the ceasefire when Israel have more possibilities to collect new and to update the information it has. But it is no doubt in both cases, whether he was dead or not, this is a very tough hit that Hamas received, and Hamas is trying to leverage this attack in order to try to change the rule of the game, especially in Cairo, when the spokesperson of the military wing, he said no more Egyptian initiative, and we are calling upon the Palestinian delegation to withdraw from the talks. Now only the arms will talk. The Hamas is trying to bring another mediator, or at least to share the mediation between Egypt and another third party that would be more acceptable to Hamas.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is, according to the State Department, now in talks again with Qatar and Turkey. Some will say this is deja vu. Netanyahu has already made it very clear that Qatar and Turkey are not honest brokers, yet the United States is pulling them back in. And as Ali said, also Hamas is looking for another honest broker besides Egypt.
First of all, Secretary of State Kerry can speak to whom he wants. I mean, he doesn't need the permission of Jerusalem yet. At the same time, let's think. Can he, there are two options. We think immediately of him talking about the Qatari, Turkish option or proposition, which is not on the table and will not be on the table because Israel is not, that dumb. Yet at the same time, maybe he speaks to them, and there's a logic, maybe if not to take the proposition, less to disturb. Because maybe they're not in Cairo right now, but the spirit of Qatar and Turkey, less Turkey, but much more Qatar, is there. Meaning what? Meaning Hamas. What in fact you have over there in Egypt right now? On one hand, you've got, of course, Egypt, not Israel. Egypt, and behind Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, On the other side, you've got Hamas, who is backing them, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday. They've got Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and to the less extent, Turkey. So one might think, or one might imagine, that Qatar is not there in order to help. So maybe that is the reason why Secretary of State Kerry is calling Qatar, or maybe they have also other reasons. Don't forget, the Americans have other also problems right now in the interest and problems in the Middle East, a lot.
And by pulling Qatar in, are they trying to appease to Hamas, saying, look, we're trying to go towards you in a certain way? We're not only backing the Israelis right now?
Maybe towards Hamas, yes, but what would be the Egyptian reaction to this initiative of the Americans? You mentioned the Secretary of State, but the Egyptians expressed their worriness from what is happening in St. Louis, Ferguson, and call
the Egyptians.
The Egyptians, and this was a way of the Egyptians to express their non-satisfaction of the whole American attitude towards Egypt, both in this conflict and in general in the relations between the U.S. and Egypt. We know that the U.S. decided to diminish the level of the representation of the U.S. in the Cairo talks. We know that Secretary of State Kerry orchestrated a conference in Paris at the beginning of this round of confrontation, from which he excluded both Israel and the Palestinians and Egypt, of course.
Right.
And this is we are seeing here some. I don't know if it is a coincidence, but Hamas on one hand is calling upon a new mediation. The Americans are trying to bring to the table other players that are not accepted by Israel and the Egyptians, which prove that for the moment, the international players are not determined, are not decided what is the best way to finish this conflict. Yesterday, there was the beginning of the talks in the Security Council of the UN about a solution to this situation. But the problem is, Yael, that none of the parties is taking the mediation seriously. The Palestinians do not want the Egyptians. The Israelis refuse to hear the name of Qatar. The Egyptians are not respecting the Americans' behavior and attitude, which means that we are in front of more days of confrontation. And the big question is whether this confrontation will last after the September 1st, when both in the West Bank and Gaza and in Israel, students should get back to their schools.
Back to schools. I-24 News correspondent Ayman Siksek focuses now on one of the most tense conflicts in the region, maybe not Israel-Gaza, but more Qatar-Egypt. Let's take a look.
Is Qatar responsible for the collapse of the ceasefire between the State of Israel and Hamas? A senior Fatah official said Wednesday that Qatari government threatened to expel Hamas chief Khalid Mash'al, who is currently based in the country, if he agreed to the Egyptian ceasefire proposal. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who is currently in Jordan, is scheduled to meet with Mash'al in Qatar on Thursday. Mash'al reiterated the strategic importance of the truce following the renewal of the conflict.
The aim is to realize the Palestinian demands, and a truce is one of the ways or tactics to ensure successful negotiations or to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza.
Israel holds Mash'al responsible for disrupting a long-term truce settlement with Hamas by making demands that Jerusalem is unwilling to meet. Most notably, Hamas had reportedly insisted that Qatar join the negotiation talks in Cairo. But Egypt refused the request, as it still resents the Qatari government's change of policies towards it since Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was brought to power. Al-Sisi met earlier this month with King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia to discuss key security issues impacting the region. But while the internal intrigue between the participants in the negotiation continues, the battle for the safety of Israel's citizens is expanding, with the fire targeting not only those on the Gaza border, but also Israelis in Tel Aviv and the capital city of Jerusalem.
Of course, Boaz, when you do look at who's to blame for the collapse of talks, it's maybe the question should be who will save the talks or will put the talks back on track, and not ask who collapsed them.
So we'll try to think about, how can you find a solution and to get that. But first of all, I was watching now concerning Qatar. This is right, it's very interesting to see. Here is a country or a little emirate that is creating the problems that one wants them to solve. It's like bizarre. It's like a little bit odd. But let's see ways, in which you can resolve problems. We tend to speak all the time about the international community, but they're so, today they're so ununited because it's a question of interest, not a question of love and relationship. It's a question of interest,
right.
And the interests are not the same. Now, we have, first of all, the country, the superpower that was supposed to solve the problems is the United States of America, who does not understand anymore the Middle East. And when we spoke about the conference in Paris,
they have their own problems right now.
And they have their problems too, yet at the same time, they don't understand, right now, and they have this wishful thinking. And by the way, the fact, even a technical thing, by in Paris organizing a few weeks ago this conference without inviting Egypt, that was really, that was awkward, that was really bizarre. But there was one thing, one option that we didn't speak this morning yet, and that is, of course, the UN resolution.
Right.
And that is something that even in Israel, it's, Israel is always very much afraid, or not afraid, is not keen to see the international community handling our problems, because we know, where it will go. Yet at the same time, in 2006, don't forget, to find a solution, to find an exit to the Second Lebanon War, you did need a 1701
right.
UN
but 1701
resolution.
was signed between Lebanon and Israel. Now we're going to who's going to be signing now?
That is true. That is why it's difficult. Yet at the same time, Israel was behind it. Meaning what? If we do find a resolution right now where Israel, instead of being finding itself being imposed a resolution, maybe working on it. So we know right now that the Jordanians have planned a resolution. The Americans have asked the Jordanians to put it aside. The British are right now also working on a certain resolution. That might be also a way in which international community might find, how would I say, concessions on all sides in order to find a solution. But one thing for me is kind of straightforward. No concession towards Hamas. They're not in a position right now to impose anything.
We're going to update that we're getting mixed reports that there was an Israeli Air Force attack in Rafiq, and we are getting some confirmations, or not confirmations, but reports that there's senior military commanders of Hamas that have been targeted.
No, there is a confirmation from the military wing of Hamas that the leaders of the Hamas southern zone of the Gaza Strip were killed, both Raed al-Attar and Muhammad Abu Shamala. Raed Abu Attar, the commander of Rafiq, Muhammad Abu Shamala, the commander of the whole southern part of the Gaza Strip, and Muhammad Barhoum, a very important leader of this zone. Also, Raed al-Attar was the one who was directly responsible for the kidnapping of Gilad Shalit. Raed al-Attar is the big guy whom we saw seizing Shalit before giving it to Muhammad Jabari and then to the Egyptians. It is a very tough hit that Hamas military wing receives this morning. It is a very tough moral hit that Hamas need to deal with, especially that it comes a day after the attempt to assassinate Muhammad Def, an assassination that yet the Hamas did not prove that it didn't take place. It is true that we didn't see not the body of Muhammad Def, but unusually to what Hamas used to do in such operation, to bring Muhammad Def to the TV or to the
no evidence
radio.
that he is alive, of course.
Exactly. Which means that the Israelis had collected critical and crucial information against this high-level commanders of Hamas. I think that it can be the beginning of a kind of game changer by the Israeli side. It will no doubt appease the critics against Benjamin Netanyahu. Now we should wait and see what would be the retaliation of Hamas.
Yeah, that is why, don't jump on conclusions, because, I think that this morning you had a few of your guests that already was starting the criticism, but that is obvious.
Burying everyone.
Because in Israel we know very much that the press likes to be very critical towards a prime minister or a government, and patients, when they speak about population which is not patient, they are the first one not to be patient, I think.
Not to be patient, but we can say perhaps that this is a change in policy by the Israeli military now. Up until now, it was targeting other targets. Now it's pinpointing Hamas Hamas leaders, and we're seeing, at least today, that there has been confirmation of a senior commander that has been
absolutely, and we need to see in the coming hours how Hamas would react. Yesterday, Hamas established new list of conditions. We don't want the Egyptian mediator. We do want to change the rules of the negotiations. Now, what was before this assassination wouldn't be the same that after this assassination.
Ali Waked, thank you. Boaz Bismuth, thank you. Next up are the headlines. We'll be back. Welcome back to I-24 News Morning Edition. It's Thursday, August 21st, 2014. It is day 45 of Operation Protective Edge. And the breaking news of this hour, Hamas says 3 of its most senior military commanders, Mohammed Abu Shamalach, Ra'id Attar, Mohammed Barhoum, have been killed in overnight strikes in Rafiq. This, of course, is coming just a day after the alleged targeted assassination of Mohammed Def, which has still not been, of course, confirmed. With me now in studio is Yossi Melman, the security and intelligence expert. Good morning, Yossi.
Good morning.
And I-24 News correspondent Anthony Grant. You'll be here with some headlines very soon. Yossi, of course, 1 day after Mohammed Def, which we still don't know, have no confirmation, although there is death certificates here and there emerging. 3 of its top commanders, and this is coming from Hamas, confirming they have been killed by Israeli airstrikes.
Yeah, it's a very dramatic announcement, first by Hamas, and just now I received the confirmation from the Israeli security service, the Shin Bet. They also confirmed that they were involved in that operation, which means they provided the information, the intelligence, and IDF carried out the operation, the strike. The intelligence was very precise. And the significant is that Hamas in recent years has changed and transformed itself into a semi-military organization. And it has been divided into military structures. And they commanded 2 of the 6 brigades which Hamas has. So their status is their ranking is like a colonel, a brigadier, commander of a brigade. Hamas has 6 like this, and they are very skillful, talented. They were involved in most major Hamas operations of the last 2 decades. They collaborated and cooperated and worked together with Mohammed Def. They are more or less the same age, emerged from the same background. And also, they were involved in most of the Hamas operations, such as the kidnapping of Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit.
In fact, Ra'id al-Attar, who's the commander of Rafiq, was one of the commanders that returned Gilad Shalit physically.
Yes, and together with Ahmed Jabri, who later was assassinated by Israel. They were involved in the tunnel project, in the rocket project. So you can imagine like 2 Israeli colonels have been killed, but Hamas has only 6 or 8 of them. So that's very, very important, and we see that the war, the more the war prolongs, the better intelligence Israel is getting.
That is a question. That up until now, can we assume that these 3 generals or commanders were underneath to the radar, and only now they've emerged because of the apparent ceasefire or the attempted ceasefire?
No, I think there is a systematic effort by the security service to gather the Shin Bet and the military intelligence to gather information on their whereabouts, and you sometimes need the luck and you need the accurate information. It's true that the more the chaotic the situation is, and there is a great chaos in Gaza, and also Israel captured some prisoners, so you can glean more information, you can get better orientation. So maybe in the circumstances of the war, it's helping to get that information, but I would say it's not because the war prolongs. They have been a target. Both of them, by the way, were on the wanted list of the Israeli security services. I think Ra'id Attar escaped several attempts on his life. As with Muhammad Def, Israel tried to kill him 4 times.
At least, right.
At least.
At least 4 times.
Known efforts.
And with regard to Def, we had a panel member earlier this morning, Oren Shachor, saying, yes, he is dead, and he confirmed it, while, of course, the death certificates that we're reporting on some are forged, and the Gaza Health Ministry is refusing to say that they're dead. Why are they refusing to say Def is dead, or maybe he's not, while, yes, confirming these 3 this morning?
I don't know how people in Israel can be certain that he died. I talked to so many officials, and they refuse to say it because they don't know, and they don't want to tear, including the Prime Minister last night in his press conference. He evaded the question. Now the assumption could be that had he been at that house, he wouldn't survive the strike.
Right.
But we don't know if he was in that house, and maybe if he was there, he managed to leave before the attack. Still, there are a lot of mysteries, including why Hamas is not providing, is just claiming that he is alive, but not providing a solid evidence. For example, a video cassette,
right,
or at least an audio. He didn't like to be videotaped, and in the rare his rare appearances were only via audio messages. Then today, the circulation of this death certificate, we don't know it's a fake or genuine. I doubt it's genuine. How social networks in Gaza would have a copy of a death certificate of the most mysterious shadow person in Gaza. Therefore,
you're still skeptical.
I'm not skeptical. My gut feeling tells me that he died, but there is no evidence, and that's why the Israeli officials are so cautious, because they don't want to become a laughing stock. They would announce his death, and then tomorrow, a week later, Hamas would parade him and show him.
And without trying to be cynical, of course, some will say here in Israel, Netanyahu needed these now 4 assassinations, if we can count Def in with them, for the political victory he needed in Israel, because he was in kind of a corner, also diplomatically, of course, but also militarily. Rockets still kept on coming in. It wasn't clear how the ground operation would continue, if it could continue, and it wasn't also clear what military goals should also be achieved. Now, although this is not new, this is not a new Israeli policy to target heads of terror chiefs, can we say that this is a game changer?
No.
Not yet, or no?
There won't be a game changer. You see, the problem, Netanyahu's and Ya'alon's problem are twofold. They are confronted on 2 fronts. One domestically, within the inner cabinet. They are criticized by their colleagues. And last night, Netanyahu was we showed from his body language and even from his words and how unhappy he is about it, how unusual it is that your colleagues are stabbing you in the back in the middle of the war. That's one front. So and the Israeli public, of course. But the most important front is vis-a-vis Hamas. And their problem is, what is their exit strategy? We know what they don't want to. They don't want to occupy Gaza. They don't want to topple the Hamas regime. They don't want to conquer Gaza. They don't want to move ground forces again into Gaza. But what do they want? How they will bring peace and quiet and calm to Israel and especially to southern Israel. And the more the war prolongs and the more Hamas is hit and suffering blows, the less chance we have for a war. I would say the opposite. Usually people are saying once Hamas would inflict a shocking blow on Hamas, we would achieve deterrence and he would surrender and he would agree for a ceasefire. I see the opposite. The weaker is, the bigger, the slimmer chance that we would have a settlement, a deal with Hamas.
Meaning now that Israel has targeted these senior terror chiefs, do you think that Hamas will change its own strategy vis-a-vis Israel?
No, they will. I mean, they will continue with what they have.
No, but if you take other targeted assassinations after Sheikh Yassin, after Rantisi, after Jabri,
all of them have been replaced with skillful, talented successors. Mm-hmm. So. It's a blow to your morale. It's a psychological win to Israel.
But in the long term, it's not effective.
Well, in the long term, it can take weeks, months. It depends on the stature of the leader. If Mohammed Deif was killed, then it would be a very significant step. But sooner or later, he would be replaced. Look, he succeeded.
Right.
Once Israel assassinated Saleh Shahade in 2002 with the same method, by dropping a bomb on the house where he was staying, killing also innocent people. In 2002, he succeeded and replaced Saleh Shahade. 12 years later, we are back in square one.
Back to square one. You spoke about Netanyahu's press conference yesterday. One of the things that he said was, of course, Hamas is ISIS, ISIS is Hamas. Yesterday, what was worrying most of the world, of course, was the beheading of the American journalist. Let's take a look at the following report, and then we'll chat.
The Islamic State released a video on Tuesday claiming to show the beheading of American journalist James Foley, who had been in captivity since he was kidnapped on November 22, 2012, by unidentified gunmen in Syria. The video, titled A Message to America, was posted on social media websites. At first, it was difficult to verify its authenticity, but according to the Associated Press, 2 U.S. officials said they believe the journalist in the video is in fact Foley. A man identified as Foley is seen kneeling in an unknown location and spoke before being beheaded.
I call on my friends, family, and loved ones to rise up against my real killers, the U.S. government. For what will happen to me is only a result of their complacency and criminality.
He then continued with a message to his parents and to his brother, a member of the United States Air Force. The masked man who carried out the act also spoke during the video.
So any attempt by you, Obama, to deny the Muslims their rights of living in safety under the Islamic Caliphate will result in the bloodshed of your people.
The man's British accent sent additional shockwaves through social media and the international community. British Prime Minister David Cameron returned from holiday to Downing Street, and Britain said it would work closely with the U.S. to identify the man. Meanwhile, at the end of the video, another man is seen on screen, accompanied by the words, Stephen Sotloff.
This American citizen, Obama, depends on your next decision.
Joining me now is Jonathan Sacherdati, our I-24 News correspondent in London. Jonathan, the UK Prime Minister David Cameron is saying that it looks, quote, increasingly likely that a man, that the man thought to be involved in the beheading is British. UK police are trying to still confirm the identity.
That's right. What we can't be sure about is exactly who this man is, but it's probably just a matter of time before the police and the intelligence services are able to identify him from sound recordings and photographs and monitoring other internet use and social media use of these 500-odd men who are known to have gone out to Syria and Iraq in order to fight with ISIS. And of course, what that will mean if they do successfully identify him as a British man, as they suspect they will, thanks to his London accent, is that we are dealing with a case of a British citizen killing an American citizen, which of course steps this whole thing up to an extra level of engagement.
And of course, this is not something new in terms of the British public, the British media. It has been following, as you said, many militants of British that do have British passports and so forth going over to fight and become jihadists. Is this taking the debate now into the media and up to a different level, of course, of trying to combat this this phenomenon?
The threat here in the UK is very serious. This is worse than the previous al-Qaeda threat, experts say. As I said, up to 500 Britons have gone out to fight in Syria and Iraq. And one security analyst here points out that that doesn't even count British jihadis who have gone to Yemen to join al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or to Somalia to join al-Shabaab, or to the Afghanistan-Pakistan region to fight alongside factions linked to the Taliban. And up to 260 of those people who've gone out to fight with forces like IS are estimated to have already returned to the UK. So the fear is that these people will be acting here as terrorists against home targets, which is, of course, a chilling idea for Britons when they see images like these in this video of such bloodthirsty, brutal, disgusting behavior.
Yossi, we have a question. We have a comment here in studio.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with what our Prime Minister said last night. I don't think Hamas is equivalent or similar to IS. There is a huge difference.
Which is?
Well, theological first, but also practical. IS aspires to create an Islamic State everywhere. Mm-hmm. Hamas is a national Islamic organization, Palestinian by nature. Mm-hmm. Also, they are much less cruel than IS. IS is simply defying all morals, ethics, norms. Hamas is adhering to some of these international norms.
And that, of course, is just one difference. But Netanyahu is, as we said, maybe using it for political and so forth.
Not maybe.
Definitely, and according to you. Jonathan Sachardati, thank you for that update from London. We're going to be back right after these headlines with more I-24 News Morning Edition. Yossi Melman, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome back to I-24 News Morning Edition special broadcast this morning. It is day 45 of Operation Protective Edge. And breaking news coming out from the past hour, Hamas says 3 of its most senior military commanders, Mohammed Abu Shamalach, Raed El Akhtar, and Mohammed Barhoum, have been killed overnight in strikes in Rafiah. The 3 were commanders in Hamas in the Southern Command, and one of them, Al Akhtar, was, of course, part of Gilad Shalit's kidnappers and was the one returning Gilad Shalit to the Israeli authorities, along with Ahmad Jabari, who was assassinated by Israel in the past. We're now going to go to our press review with I-24 News correspondent Anthony Grant. Good morning, Anthony.
Hey, good morning.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
What are we starting with?
Well, of course, much of the Israeli press is abuzz with the is-he or isn't-he situation with Mohammed Def. You have Haaretz, of course, saying, despite Hamas denial, still unclear whether Mohammed Def has been assassinated. Mm-hmm. So, again, we've talked about that, but that's also in Yediot Aharonot, Israel Hayom, the other Israeli newspapers. So as that continues to be discussed in the press, we also have on the international arena an interesting article in Le Monde from Paris, which talks about basically Gaza, how Hollande, that's French President Francois Hollande, has toughened his talk regarding the situation with Gaza and the hostilities over the past month. And they have an article basically tracking his remarks over the course of the past 6 weeks. And of course, France being a big diplomatic player in any given situation, because France is a member of the Security Council.
And he changed his talk throughout, right? It was kind of like a ping pong game of rhetoric.
That's what the article kind of says. And of course, it's basically he ratcheted it up in a recent interview by calling for the demilitarization of Gaza, along with wanting a lifting of the blockade. But this is a more robust talk coming from Hollande, almost at a time when we've seen a bit of Obama has other huge issues as well, and not just in the Middle East. But you have some of these European players like Hollande who are stepping up to the plate, it seems, at least in terms of their rhetoric. And so that's of great interest, of course, to the French foreign policy establishment.
Absolutely. What else?
We also have the Express, British newspaper, with the headline that Twitter has suspending its users sharing graphic imagery of U.S. journalist James Foley's beheading by the ISIS.
Yeah, that was. I commend Twitter for doing that.
I commend them as well. I mean, all the social media have come under fire for various things. Facebook, Twitter giving a platform, whether it's to tastelessness of Hamas or Al Qaeda, or
not only that,
now this one is really extreme.
Extreme, and also, in conventional media, there were very clear rules what you can and cannot show. And social media kind of broke those rules in a good way as well, making information more free and accessible. But there's some things that
you wonder actually, the people that are doing these committing these acts of brutality. At some level, are they thinking, well, I'm going to do this because I know it's going to get huge traction on social media? And so, again, kudos there to Twitter for giving some pushback on that. And I'm sure that the family is, of course, is heartened by that at this very difficult time.
Absolutely. What else do you have?
Christian Science Monitor, interesting story here about some interesting events in Lebanon. Lebanon has said to the United States, we need military aid too. And what are they talking about? Well, the Lebanese army is having its own issues combating some Sunni militants in some of the remote areas of eastern Lebanon, particularly in the village border town of Arsal. And apparently the Saudis are going to be giving about a $1 billion donation package for the Lebanese army. So the U.S. is actually also planning to send the Lebanese army additional supplies of Hellfire missiles. Quite interesting, because this was coming really just days after the White House apparently blocked more transfers of Hellfire missiles to Israel for different reasons. But again, people still look to the United States as the supplier par excellence of military equipment.
So every country and their patron.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, that's interesting to watch in that part of the region.
I'm just going to get a quick update, Anthony, I apologize, from Daniel Roth. Daniel, you're at Ben Gurion Airport this morning, our I-24 news correspondent there. Of course, Hamas has vowed to start firing on the airport from 6 a.m. So far, it is quiet, but there are some international airlines that have canceled flights.
Yeah, so we've seen two cancellations, one to Cairo and one to Amman departing from Ben Gurion Airport. These were the only two cancellations that we've seen so far. Now, the spokesperson for the airport said this has nothing to do with the situation, or rather that he doesn't know that it has anything to do with the situation. He said we should speak to the airlines, and we're on the way to finding that out. But it's, there's also, it seems to be an effort here to, first of all, everyone is calm here. Everyone's as calm as travelers are on a regular basis. But also you sort of get a sense from speaking to officials that there's an effort to create a sense of calm also, that they aren't necessarily interested in creating a panic such as happened last month.
So, Daniel Roth, two international airlines, a Royal Jordanian and also an airline traveling to Cairo, have canceled their flights. They haven't confirmed that it has to do with Hamas threats, but it is important to note that last time the FAA did cancel international airlines, it was because of a rocket that landed in the vicinity of the airport. Not in the vicinity of the airport, but maybe a mile away.
Yeah, it came very, very close. I was actually there covering that day, and it came close, and it caused a panic, and the FAA canceled flights, and a number of airlines, international airlines, followed suit. And it was actually a very big political win for Hamas. It created panic. It did the job that they wanted to do. And so it seems, again, that this time now with the threat, again, there's been no alarms in the area. There was a threat, but no action thus far. But as of now, there's a sense of calm and an effort to keep it calm, it seems, from officials in the area.
Daniel Roth, thank you for that update. And of course, you will be continuing to update us throughout the day here at I-24 News. Anthony, I'm sending it back to you. What other headlines do you have this morning?
Interesting thing from the St. Paul Pioneer Press over in the lovely state of Minnesota.
Okay.
Which reports that...
I wasn't aware of that media outlet up until now.
It's quite a reputable newspaper. Says that Black Hawk helicopters are continuing their sort of elusive training over the Twin Cities until tonight. Thursday night, Twin Cities being Minneapolis and St. Paul. And why is this odd? Well, these are helicopters from the U.S. Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and they started flying around the past few nights in between apartment buildings and neighborhoods in St. Paul, Highland Park, and people didn't know what was going on. They thought, what's going on here? Some kind of, who knows, mystery invasion or whatnot. And apparently it's a legitimate Army training exercise, but no one was given advance notice. And it's caused some controversy, keeping people up at night. These are big helicopters. And all this talk about...
And flying through the high-rise buildings.
Flying, apparently, yeah. And, you know, it's all in the spirit of military preparedness. But in the past, when these kind of exercises have happened, people have been warned. But for some reason, not this time. So some controversy there in the heartland of America.
All right. What else do you have?
Some controversy in Hollywood. The Hollywood Reporter reports on this new book about the political secrets of Saturday Night Live being revealed.
Oh, I'm the first one to buy that one.
Yeah, this is something it's like a revision of an existing book, but it's taking on some political dimensions because of some new revelations that are made in the book. For example, they talk about how Hillary Clinton made a last-minute decision in 2007 to pass up an appearance on the show, and guess who stepped in for her place?
Bill.
Barack.
Oh.
Yes. And how Saturday Night Live, in a way, shapes some of the national conversation, gives politicians a platform.
Because, of course, then Barack was the one that was elected.
Yes. I mean, not saying it was a causal link there, but it could have helped. And, you know,
don't undermine the power of SNL.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
SNL.
Of SNL specifically, right. Talking about Sarah Palin and the whole situation when she was being impersonated by Tina Fey and some of the backstory to that. So it's making interesting reading in the book review rounds. So interesting stuff there.
Quickly, last one.
The Verge reports that the NFL is asking artists like Coldplay and Rihanna and Katy Perry to pay to perform at the next Super Bowl halftime show, which sounds kind of crazy. The other way around. Yeah, they think that because they're getting so much publicity, 115 million people tune into the halftime show alone, apparently, that the artist should pay them for the privilege of performing, and of course they've kind of said, no.
Yeah, wow. Crazy. I mean, it's a crazy world out there, folks.
It is. I mean, a lot of reversals of
you have Katy Perry paying for her own screen time, and you know, things happening here in the Middle East. I can't keep up.
Exactly.
Anthony Grant, thank you for that. With us now is Benjamin Tiong-Alvarez, the I-24 News economic news anchor and markets correspondent. Benjamin, thank you for joining us this morning.
Hi, good morning.
So Economic Magazine is back up and running after a pretty tough month there, of course, here in Israel, and still continuing, but you're still covering, of course, how the operation has impacted the Israeli economy, the Palestinian economy, and what's in between.
Yes, indeed. And one of the latest stories, of course, is boycotting and sanctioning and divesting, and it's happening on both sides. Specifically, we have a story regarding how the whole situation with Operation Protective Edge has influenced Israeli Arabs, but specifically also Palestinians living in the West Bank, where there has been a move to boycott Israeli products. Well, considering how close the two economies are completely interlocated, a lot of the products
very dependent, right?
Yes, I mean the Palestinian economy, truthfully, is much more dependent on the Israeli economy, but a lot of the goods coming in are from Israel. So the idea behind it is that this boycott will have an impact on the Israeli economy. Sadly, that's not actually the fact, because of all of the products that Israel exports, only about 6.3% goes into the West Bank.
What kind of products are we talking about?
Everything from everyday products, you know, foods, you name it. Anything and everything goes in there.
Because the BDS movement, also politically, the political leadership in Israel has been warning against it for quite a while, and we've seen, you know, food taken off shelves in central London supermarkets and so forth. Is it more of a PR kind of a ploy, or do we see economic impact?
A lot of it is actually, it's all related essentially to the very strong and remarkable PR campaign that the Palestinians have led since the Second Intifada. The BDS movement specifically has managed to get a lot of support outside of Israel, in Europe, in America. Economically, so far, it has not really had an impact. it is true that from Europe, the EU had decided, and as of September 1st, there will be no more produce going in from what the Israelis call Judea and Samaria, what we know as the West Bank. But that also, again, is really a very, very small part of produce going out to Europe. And in addition to that, with the sanctions now against Russia, and Russia, having counter sanctions, so to speak, retaliating against Europe over the situation in Ukraine, there's another avenue, so to speak, for these products to go to Russia.
A lot of the criticism, though, the BDS movement is, as you said, is they're not only boycotting, products from the West Bank settlements, which has a political tag to it, and maybe, can be explained and so forth. They're protesting Israeli products in general, and that definitely will have an effect, maybe not the short term, but a long term on the economy if it continues.
It's hard to know because it depends on to what extent it actually gets accepted, and ultimately the way sanctions are effective is when governments go in and say, from now on, we are no longer doing this. We're not buying, we're not, there will be a penalty, there will be a fee to pay if you have business with these people. We have seen in Israel very, very rich and strong relationships with countries that we are actually not friendly with at all. Trade
because
tends
of common economic interests?
Money talks. So until a government actually puts its foot down and said, from now on, we're no longer buying products from Israel, from such and such industries, it's not going to have as big of an impact.
We also heard during the operation the Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman calling on Israelis not to buy from Arab stores within Israel. Obviously, this was not in order to economically crumble the Arab sector, but it's more, this is PR. That is a fine line, isn't it?
Honestly, from my perspective, from a pure economic perspective, I think both sides are PR. Neither side is really economically based. Neither side, both sides have a very clear objective of wanting to push their political agenda. So it's PR, and it's, your average sort of normal thinking person is not going to be led by PR unless they have very clear political convictions.
So the economic forecast in Israel, also looking back at the operation, that's going to be one thing. But in terms of boycotts and so forth, it is serious maybe to its image, but not to its economy. Can we say that?
I would definitely say that. I think that as far as PR goes, the extent to which, and if you can't necessarily call it PR, but the extent to which pictures have gone out of the atrocities, of things that have happened mostly in Gaza, also in Israel, that is what affects people. And on a personal level, people may decide, from now on, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to buy that. Who knows how long it's going to last?
Right.
From a government perspective, it's so far not really happening.
And doesn't make much of a dent as
it
is.
No.
Benjamin, of course, your economy magazine every day at?
Every day at 7:10 Israeli time.
So we will be tuning in. Good to have you back, of course. And thank you for joining us. Anthony Grant, thank you for joining us. We're finished here for today here at I-24 News Morning Edition. We'll be back tomorrow. Next up are the headlines. I'm Yael Wisner-Levy. It is day 45 of Operation Protective Edge. Keep on tuning in to I-24 News for the latest here in Israel. We'll be back.